Welcome to the last part of this video series, in which we've been looking at celebrities' last words. English film director and producer Alfred Hitchcock's final words before his death were, "One never knows the ending. One has to die to know what exactly happens after death, although Catholics have their hopes." Hitchcock died aged 80 in his Bel Air home of renal failure on 29 April 1980, while biographer Spoto wrote that Hitchcock rejected suggestions that he allow a priest to come for a visit or celebrate a quiet, informal ritual at the house for his comfort. Jesuit priest Father Mark Henninger wrote that he and fellow priest Tom Sullivan celebrated Mass at the filmmaker's home. Father Sullivan heard Hitchcock's confession. Near the end of his life, Hitchcock had worked on the script for a projected spy thriller, The Short Night, collaborating with James Costigan, Ernest Lehman, and David Freeman. Despite some preliminary work, the screenplay was never filmed. This was because primarily by Hitchcock's seriously declining health and his concerns for his wife Alma, who had suffered a stroke. The screenplay was eventually published in Freeman's 1999 book, The Last Days of Alfred Hitchcock. American actress Lucille Ball's final words were, "My Florida water," when asked if she needed anything. On April 18, 1989, Ball was at her home in Beverly Hills when she complained of chest pains. An ambulance was called and she was rushed to the emergency room of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. She was diagnosed with dissecting aortic aneurysm and underwent heart surgery for nearly 8 hours, receiving an aorta from a 27-year-old man who had died in a motorcycle accident. The surgery appeared to have been successful, and Ball began recovering very quickly, even walking around her room with little assistance. She received a flurry of get well wishes from Hollywood, and across the street from Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, the Hard Rock Cafe erected a sign reading, "Hard Rock loves Lucy." However, shortly after dawn on April 26, Ball awoke with severe back pains and soon lost consciousness. All attempts to revive her proved unsuccessful, and she died at 5:47. Doctors determined that the 77-year-old comedian had succumbed to a second aortic rupture, this time in the abdominal area, and that it was unrelated to her surgery the previous week. American movie actor Humphrey Bogart's final words were, "I should never have switched from Scotch to Martinis." Bogart, a heavy smoker and drinker, had developed cancer of the esophagus. He almost never spoke of his failing health and refused to see a doctor until January 1956. A diagnosis was made several weeks later, but by then, removal of his esophagus, 2 lymph nodes, and a rib on March 1, 1956, it was too late to halt the disease, even with chemotherapy. During a film career of almost 30 years, Bogart appeared in more than 75 feature films. In 1999, the American Film Institute ranked Bogart as the greatest male star of classic American cinema. Over his career, he received 3 Academy nominations for Best Actor, winning 1 for The African Queen. American comedian and actor Jackie Gleason's last words were, "I always knew what I was doing." Gleason smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day. While touring in the lead role of Larry Gelbart's play, Sly Fox in 1978, he suffered chest pains, forcing him to leave the show in Chicago and undergo triple bypass surgery. Gleason initially went to the hospital for chest pains, but was treated and released. After he suffered another bout the following week, it was determined that heart surgery was necessary. During production of his last movie, he was suffering from terminal colon cancer, which was metastasized to his liver. "I won't be around much longer," he told his daughter at dinner one evening after a day of filming. Gleason kept his medical problems private, although there were rumors that he was seriously ill. A year later, on June 24, 1987, Gleason died at his Florida home. American aviator Amelia Earhart's final words were, "Please know that I'm quite aware of the hazards. Women must try to do things as men have tried. When they fail, their failure must be but a challenge to others." Earhart was the first female aviator to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. She received the U.S. Distinguished Flying Cross for this record. She set many other records, wrote best-selling books about her flying experiences, and was instrumental in the formation of the 99s, an organization for female pilots. During an attempt to make a circumnavigational flight of the globe in 1937 in a Purdue-funded Lockheed Model 10 Electra, Earhart disappeared over the Central Pacific Ocean near Holland Island. Fascination with her life, career, and disappearance continues to this day. Many researchers believe the plane ran out of fuel and that Earhart was ditched at sea. Navigator and aeronautical engineer Elgin Long and his wife Mary Long devoted 35 years of exhaustive research to the crash and sink theory, which is the most widely accepted explanation for the disappearance. Chester Bennington was an American singer, songwriter, musician, and actor. He served as lead singer for the bands Linkin Park, Dead by Sunrise, and Stone Temple Pilots. Bennington first gained prominence as a vocalist following the release of Linkin Park's debut album, Hybrid Theory, in 2000, which became a commercial success. The album was certified diamond by the Recording Industry Association of America in 2005, making it the best-selling debut album of the decade, as well as one of the few albums ever to hit that many sales. Linkin Park's following studio albums, from Meteora in 2003 to One More Light in 2017, continued the band's success. Linkin Park have sold over 100 million records worldwide. Bennington was found dead at his home in Palo Verdes Estates, California. His housekeeper discovered his body at around 9 a.m. on July 20th, 2017. His death was ruled as suicide by hanging. On July 21st, Brian Elias, the chief of operations for the Office of the Medical Examiner Coroner, confirmed that a half-empty bottle of alcohol was found at the scene, but no other drugs were present. His final last words in his last interview before death, "I came to a point in my life where I was like, I can either just give up and die, or I can fight for what I want. And I chose to fight for what I wanted." Malcolm X, an African-American Muslim minister and human rights activist, said the following words before being assassinated: "Let's call it brothers." To his admirers, he was a courageous advocate for the rights of blacks, a man who indicted white America in the harshest terms for its crimes against black Americans. Detractors accused him of preaching racism and violence. He had been called one of the greatest and most influential African Americans in history. Malcolm X was effectively orphaned early in life. His father was killed when he was 6, and his mother was placed in a mental hospital when he was 13, after which he lived in a series of foster homes. In 1946, at the age of 20, he went to prison for larceny and breaking and entering. While in prison, Malcolm X became a member of the Nation of Islam, and after his parole in 1952, quickly rose to become one of the organization's most influential leaders. In February 1965, he was assassinated by 3 members of the Nation of Islam. Stephen Hawking was an English theoretical physicist, cosmologist, author, and director of research at the Center for Theoretical Cosmology within the University of Cambridge. His scientific works included a collaboration with Roger Penrose on gravitational singularity theorems in the framework of general relativity and the theoretical prediction that black holes emit radiation, often called Hawking radiation. Hawking was the first to set out a theory of cosmology explained by a union of the general theory of relativity and quantum mechanics. He was a vigorous supporter of the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. Hawking had a rare early-onset slow-progressing form of motor neuron disease, also known as amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. It gradually paralyzed him over the decades. Even after the loss of his speech, he was still able to communicate through a speech-generating device, initially through use of a handheld switch, and eventually by using a single cheek muscle. He died on 14th March 2018 at the age of 76. His family stated that he had died peacefully. His last words in an interview were, "I have lived with the prospect of an early death for the last 49 years. I'm not afraid of death, but I'm in no hurry to die. I have so much I want to do first. I regard the brain as a computer which will stop working when its components fail. There is no heaven or afterlife for broken down computers. That is a fairy story for people afraid of the dark." British Prime Minister Winston Churchill's final words were, "I am bored with it all." Despite poor health, Churchill still tried to remain active in public life, and on St. George's Day 1964 sent a message of congratulations to the surviving veterans of the 1918 Zeebrugge raid who were attending a service of commemoration in Deal, Kent, where 2 casualties of the raid were buried in the Hamilton Road Cemetery. On 15th January 1965, Churchill suffered a severe stroke that left him gravely ill. He died at his London home 9 days later, at age 90, on the morning of Sunday 24th January 1965, 70 years to the day after his father's death. Queen Elizabeth II granted him the honor of a state funeral, which saw one of the largest assemblies of world statesmen in history. Named the greatest Briton of all time in a 2002 poll, Churchill is widely regarded as being among the most influential people in British history, consistently ranking well in opinion polls of prime ministers of the United Kingdom. On the night of January 5th, 1919, former US President Theodore Roosevelt suffered breathing problems. He felt better after treatment from his physician, Dr. George Feiler, and went to bed. Roosevelt's last words were, "Please put out that light, James." This was to his family servant James Amos. Between 4 and 4:15 the next morning, Roosevelt died in his sleep at Sagamore Hill. A blood clot had detached from a vein and traveled to his lungs. Vice President Thomas Marshall, Charles Evans Hughes, Warren Harding, Henry Cabot Lodge, and William Howard Taft were among the mourners. The snow-covered procession route to Young's Memorial Cemetery was lined with spectators and a squad of mounted policemen who had ridden from New York City. Roosevelt was buried on a hillside overlooking Oyster Bay. The first president of the United States' final last words were, "I am just going. Have me decently buried, and do not let my body be put into the vault in less than 2 days after I am dead." These final words were said during a conversation with Washington's personal secretary, Tobias Leyer. Leyer nodded assent, and Washington asked, "Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," he replied, followed by Washington's final response, "'Tis well." The diagnosis of Washington's final illness and the immediate cause of his death have been subjects of debate since the day he died. In the days immediately following his death, Doctors Craig and Dick's published account stated that they felt his symptoms had been consistent with cyanide trichalis, a term of that period used to describe severe inflammation of the structures of the upper airway. Various modern medical authors have speculated that Washington probably died from a severe case of epiglottis, which was complicated by the given treatments, all of which were accepted medical practice in Washington's day, most notably the massive deliberate blood loss, which almost certainly caused hypovolemic shock. And winding up our video series is former US President Thomas Jefferson. His last words were, "Is it the 4th?" Jefferson died on 4th of July 1826, 50 years to the day after signing of the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson's approximately $100,000 of debt weighed heavily on his mind in his final months, as it became increasingly clear he would have little to leave to his heirs. In February 1826, he successfully applied to the General Assembly to hold a public lottery as a fundraiser. His health began to fail him in July 1825 due to a combination of rheumatism from arm and wrist injuries, as well as intestinal and urinary disorders, and by June 1826, he was confined to bed. On July 3rd, Jefferson was overcome by fever and declined an invitation to Washington to attend an anniversary celebration of the Declaration. During the last hours of his life, he was accompanied by family members and friends. On July 4th at 12:50 p.m., Jefferson died at the age of 83 on the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and just a few hours before the death of John Adams. The sitting president, Adams' son John Quincy, called the coincidence of their deaths on the nation's anniversary visible and palpable remarks of divine favor.